let's walk through Lab 1, this time using Excel. So even though my instructions for the lab talk about Google and Excel are very similar, and I'll be using both throughout the semester. You can potentially stick with one. One might be a little bit more difficult in some places than the other. Some of the instructions can be a little tricky, but we will work through it. Know that you cannot break these programs. Some of the biggest fears that I see in students is they're afraid they're going to do something wrong. You can't do anything wrong in this program and break it. So the first thing we're going to do is open the Google Sheet. Now, this has data in it, and the reason that it is a Google Sheet instead of Excel is because Google is easier to share online. So we'll click on the Google Sheet. We'll load our sheet. Notice that this sheet is already listed as view only. Do not request edit access. Since we're using Excel, we're going to come over here to File and Download. And we're going to download Microsoft Excel. It gives me a sheet that pops up, or it gives me a download. I can click on that. And here I have a file. Anytime you download something from the internet and you open it in a Microsoft product, Microsoft puts it in protected view. And that's just in case there might be some malware or viruses that are in this file and it's not sure about it. So it's safer to stay in protected view just to look, but since we are going to be editing, we're going to click that Enable Editing. So we click Enable Editing, and now we have an Excel file that we can work with. I am going to first increase my magnification so we can see it a little bit better on the screen. And the Excel ribbon up at the top, the tabs that they have up at the top, are very similar to Microsoft Word. So if you've been using Word, you'll see a lot of the familiar formatting options that are there. Some things to point out. Sure, we have cut, copy, paste. We have our text formatting. We have alignment. Merge and center allows us to put cells together. Wrap text allows us to drop lines, so we can have multiple lines in a cell instead of just one. This section on number allows us to format as currency, format as percent. We can increase and decrease the decimal, so this increases decimal, this decreases decimal. If you're one of those savvy ones that wants to switch back and forth between the two programs, know that Google has these switched. So the order in Google is decrease and then increase. Here in Microsoft, it's increase and then decrease. So just make sure you read the pop-ups. They're always there to help you. And then we've got some other ribbons up top. The insert, lots of stuff here. We are going to use this in Chapter 2. Page layout, formulas, data. We'll do some sorting a little bit later as well. So there's a lot of stuff in here. Google and Excel will do almost exactly the same things. There are some functions that are a little bit different between the two of them. There are some graphs that will come out looking a little bit differently. But essentially they are, for all intents and purposes, practically the same. I use both because I know that some students it's easier to work on Google, some students it's easier to work in Excel. So I tend to use both. Just be really careful with Lab 1 Probability and Lab 1 Prob and Count, these first two tabs. I don't want you to accidentally overwrite things. They should just be for viewing as part of the experiment, part of the lab. So try not to edit those two sheets. But if you do, you can always download a new copy. We're going to come over to Lab 1 Part 1, and I'm going to walk you through some little bits of information here. We have columns that are labeled with letters, and we have rows that are labeled with numbers. If I click into a particular cell, which is what one of these rectangles is called, then up here, it tells me where I am. So my cursor is on B7, and that cell is selected. So this tells me my address wherever my cursor is. We're going to find cell A3 and click on it and type into it. And then we're going to go to B5. And type in B5. But, oh, I'm not done. I want to change something. Well, if I want to change something in that cell, if I start typing, it completely rewrites whatever I had before. If I hit enter and the cursor moves off that cell, then whatever's there that I typed in has now replaced what I did before. But if I need to fix it, I can come up here to the very, very top and I have an undo. And the undo will allow me to go back to what it was before. If I try to type in, but I don't hit enter, I can hit escape. And escape basically just does away with whatever it was I was editing. So there's a couple of different ways to recover what we did before, to undo what we were doing, get back with something that we started with. So there's a lot of options there. Now, I want to edit this cell, but I can't do it by clicking on the cell. That's not going to work. So what I can do to just edit what's inside the cell, because I want to keep this is cell B5. I just want to add something to it. I'm going to go in what's called the function bar. So this function bar, this area of text right here, between the menu and the actual spreadsheet, we can add and edit information. So we can edit what's in the cell. We can also edit what's in the cell by double clicking so that we get a cursor inside the cell. So this is just another way to do the exact same thing as typing up here in the function bar. Again, multiple ways we can do the same thing. So we type in our favorite color. We can widen the column and we can shrink the column. So notice with my cursor, I have this big white plus sign. Try to make it a little bit bigger. So my cursor has turned into this plus sign, a white plus sign. If I scroll over to the edge, it changes to a different type of mouse. A black XY plane with the pointer on it. If I come up here to the column labels, notice if I come up, I get a new cursor. Here I have a down arrow, but if I come closer to the edge between the two columns, I get a double arrow with a bar. So this double arrow with a bar is what allows me to change the width of the columns. So I click and I drag and I can get a new width. I can do the same thing over here with the rows. Click and drag and my rows can get bigger or smaller. So we can adjust the size and the shape of all of these rectangles just by waiting for that mouse to change and then clicking and dragging. We need to change the cell color. So I'm going to come back up to the home menu and go to the paint bucket. I'm going to fill it not with that color. I like this turquoisey color here. So I'll put that in there. I want the text to be different because that pink is just too pink. So we can make something a little bit darker. You change the color to complement. Pick favorite colors, make it something different. One other thing to point out, if I have the cell selected and I come up and I change the font color, it changes the font color for the entire cell. But if I don't want that and I only want part of it changed, I can highlight it in the function bar and I get a menu with Excel. I get a little pop-up menu that allows me to change the formatting. And I can change it back to a different color and only leave part of it a certain color, another color. So there's a lot of flexibility here that we can do. All right. Next up, if we scroll down, we have a table with some information, favorite colors, and counts. Edit that table and make it pretty. Make it snazzy. Something more flashy than what it is. So change colors, add some flair to it. We could center the labels. We could make the labels bold. You could change the colors of the text so that it matches the colors that they're being asked for, or something different. Change this table, add to it, move things around, explore the options that you have available. So practice a little bit and get used to working in Excel. For part 2, we're going to click over to this Lab 1 probability Google Sheet. So the very first one. What's in this sheet is a class of 32 students who already flipped coins, and they've entered their data here. So what I want you to do is what I alluded to in that first video. Lab 1 part 2, I want you to flip some coins. So grab 4 coins, flip them 10 times, record your results in the table. When you're done with that, summarize. So count how many heads and how many tails for the penny, for the nickel, for the dime, and for the quarter. And the number of tails. Remember that these 2 cells should equal 10 because you're flipping the penny 10 times and the nickel 10 times and the dime 10 times and the quarter 10 times. If you, for some reason, can't find a coin of that particular denomination, just use another coin and flip it again. And put it in place of, for example, you have a penny, flip the penny 40 times, and make 40 results in your table. It's okay. Empirical probability, we're going to talk about the probability of flipping a head. So take the number of heads divided by 10 for each one of those experiments. What's the theoretical probability for flipping a head? We've talked about this one. In question 4, cell B23, compare your empirical probability with your theoretical. Why are they different? How similar are they? Ponder that and respond to why they are different. Then, when you're done with that part, come back to the first tab and randomly select a student from the list. I'm going to start in column A and select my student. I'm selecting student 26. I'm clicking on the first cell and I'm holding that mouse button down and dragging it all the way across. I can right click inside and copy, or I can come up to the home screen and copy. Either one is fine. Then we're going to go back to our part 2, scroll back up next to our data. In cell G3, I can right click and paste, or I can click the paste button up top. Several ways of getting that information there. And here we have student 26's data, and we're going to repeat what we did for ourselves for whichever student you choose. So I'm going to copy my table here and scroll over and put it underneath my student table that I chose. We're going to do the exact same thing. Now I'm going to bump this out just a little bit so I have more room. You're allowed to do that. So write about the student information. How far was their empirical and theoretical probabilities apart? Why would that be the case? And then once you do the summary, now compare yours to the other students. What's going on? Talk about differences, talk about similarities. When you're done with that, you can move on to part 3. So in part 3, we've got a sample size of flipping a coin 10 times. Part 3 is coming from week 3 lessons dealing with counting and probability. So if you haven't gotten to week 3 lessons yet, that's okay. You can wait on this particular step and come back to it after next week, which is another reason why this lab is due in week 3, so that you have a chance to look at that content and get a better understanding of it. Sample size of flipping a coin 10 times. If I flip a coin once, my sample size is 2, so I am going to do it 10 times. So I'm going to repeat it. I want Excel to calculate this. Anytime I want Excel to act like a calculator, I'm going to put equals first, and then I type in my equation or my formula that I want it to do. So I'm going to type in equals. The first coin flip, I have 2 outcomes. I'm going to multiply that by the second coin flip of 2 outcomes, because this is the multiplication rule of counting. If I do something and I do something else and then I do something else, the total number of outcomes of doing all of these events, these experiments will be multiplying the outcomes for each of those events, each of those experiments together. So I have 2 outcomes for the first flip, 2 outcomes for the second, for the third, for the fourth, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th flip. And if I hit enter, I have 1,024 different outcomes in my sample space for flipping 10 times. Now for E, you're asked to choose an event. Choose an event for flipping a coin 10 times. So I'm going to use the example provided, which is 5 heads and 5 tails. So I'm going to look at flipping 5 heads and 5 tails, but this is really in any order. It doesn't really matter that it's all 5 heads at first and all 5 tails. I'm just going to count, right? So we could put, instead of this, we could put 5 heads and 5 tails. Now for the number in E, we've got a formula given, and this is the formula for permutations with repeated outcomes. So we have repeating heads and repeating tails. I need that information to divide out. So on top, n factorial, that's 10 factorial. So on the top, I'm going to do 10 times 9 all the way down. And I've got a small mistake I need to correct. 2 multiplication signs. Divided by, and I'm going to use double parentheses because I have to do a number for heads and a number for tails. So I have to do a multiplication for heads and a multiplication for tails. So here's my heads. My heads is 5 heads, so I'm going to do 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. And then I'm going to do the same thing for tails. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then close the parentheses to make sure that I'm closing my denominator. Now, here, you don't get to pick 5 heads and 5 tails. You have to pick something else. You cannot pick all heads or all tails. You have to have at least 1 head, at least 1 tail, but you can't do 5 and 5 because I'm doing that. You can pick anything, any other combination you want to. And then I forgot to hit equals, so I'm going to come back up here and click in my function bar, hit equals, and make it calculate, and I have a pretty big number, 252. Theoretical probability, I want Excel to calculate it again, and this time instead of typing in numbers, I'm just going to click on the cells. I'm going to use what's called a cell reference. So I'm going to click on 252, the total number in E, divided by the total number in N. And if I hit enter, I get a probability. This is my theoretical probability for 5 heads and 5 tails. Using cell references is pretty powerful because if I had made a mistake up here, let's say I had too many 2s. I don't, but let's say I did. Watch what happens with this probability down here in step 3. When I hit enter, it changes. But I'm going to change it back because I didn't make a mistake. I just wanted to show you that it changes, which is pretty awesome. Okay. For step 4, in calculating the empirical probability of E, we're going to come over to the prob and count section. Here is all of that student data, but we've got it counted for us. So I have student data and then I have counts. So here I can pick the one that I chose. I chose 5 heads, 5 tails. So there were 31 instances in this whole class out of 122 total flips. So I'm going to take 31 and divide it by 122 in my part 3. And again, making Excel calculate it instead of going out and getting another calculator to calculate it. Excel and Google are powerful calculators in and of themselves. They'll do pretty much anything your calculator will do for you as well. And hit enter, and I have 0.254 here. I am going to come over to my home ribbon and decrease decimals so that I have 3 decimal places to work with. I can compare step 3 and step 4 a little bit easier and then compare them. So down here in A14, compare the theoretical and the empirical. All right, completing out that lab. And then when you're done, you have 3 parts that are completed. Part 1, which you are allowed to play with formatting a little bit. Part 2, talking about your flipping experiment compared to a student's flipping experiment. And then part 3, calculating an actual event and the probabilities associated with it and your comparisons. I'm not typing the comparisons in my video, but you should in your worksheet. When you are done, give it a name, save it. Because you're using Excel, you have to do a file upload. So when you come over to the lab assignment and you click submit, you'll be given an option of a URL or a file upload. Make sure you do a file upload. And that's the conclusion for Lab 1. I hope that this gives you a little more confidence in working in the spreadsheet apps, and we'll be using them a lot throughout the entire semester.